Support for today's episode comes from Jenny Kane. Summer is here, and who doesn't want to have that easy breezy, minimalist wardrobe for the season? This refined California brand will have you looking elevated and feeling oh so comfortable. My favorites are the draping maxi dresses with so much flow and ease, like the drift dress. Also, check out the road dress. The classic lines are very Jackie O. And what's great is that these pieces will never go out of style. And they've got home essentials too. You can find your forever pieces at jennykane.com. Our listeners get 15% off your first order when you use code OVER50 at checkout. That's 15% off your first order. JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code OVER50. Again, head to jennykane.com to get 15% off your first order when you use code OVER50 at checkout. That's 15% off your first order. JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code OVER50. Let getting dressed be one less thing to worry about. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Over 50 and Flourishing, a subject that is on a lot of our minds as most of us are in the sandwich generation, which means that we are literally raising our adult children and caring for our aging parents. So many of you had questions about that, so I brought in a couple of experts. We have Mike and Kim Barnes. They're award-winning newscasters from Austin, Texas. Kim worked for 12 years in news at KVUE and Mike for 29 years in sports. But after leaving TV, they found themselves helping their aging parents more and more, and they are here to open up that conversation and to answer all of our questions. Kim and Mike Barnes, so good to have you with me today. Thank you for making the trip from out of town. I know you're here to see your mother,
yes,
and we're going to talk a lot about that. But it's also very cool to be sitting among fellow journalists. You know, both of you worked at KVUE for quite some time. You the longest for 30 years,
Almost
right?
30, yes.
And Kim?
For about 12, and then plus some other work I did for them after that.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
And of course, everybody thought you got married at the station.
That's right. That's a long story.
That's a long story. But what I love is that your journalism background has really led you to this new passion, and you've already had a voice and a gift of storytelling, but now you've got a purpose and a passion, and it's parenting aging parents. And there is so much to unpack in this interview. I want to tell you from the get-go, it is the number one question that I get from my viewers because we're all the same age-ish, the sandwich generation, our kids are growing up, our parents are getting older, and it's a lot of work. Where do we even start?
Well, and the hard part is, at least for us, is that we've never done it before.
Correct.
It's the first time, so it's like, where are we? What do we do?
Yeah.
We're just lost and overwhelmed.
And there's no roadmap, it seems.
No.
You know, we're all in it and scratching our heads and thinking, how, where, what?
Well, and the hardest part is that every road is different because different personalities, different family dynamics, different medical conditions, throw it all in one big pot, and it's just so tough.
Yeah. What was the impetus for you guys to start this?
It was sort of an accident a little bit, but he can take either the he can take the credit.
Blame.
Yeah. So what happened?
Well, my mom has Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And Alzheimer's is not an overnight thing.
Right.
As it got worse and worse and worse, first my sister and I talked to my dad about, okay, let's move from the house into independent living. And he was very accommodating and then realized this is the best thing I've ever done. And it helped my mom quite a bit because she wasn't as isolated. She had more people to be around. So it helped a little bit, but nothing improved. She kept going downhill. And as she kept getting worse and worse and worse with her Alzheimer's, we talked to him again about mom's going to need to move to memory care. Not tomorrow, not even next month, but pretty soon we need to start looking at it. Yeah. And he said, y'all are in charge. So my sister and I went and looked at 4 memory care places within about 2 miles of the independent living place where they live up in the Dallas area. And I went in with the attitude like, this is going to be so easy. It's like looking for an apartment. Just make sure the closet is good enough for my mom's clothes.
Sure.
And I got in there and I realized that they're throwing all these acronyms at me and talking about how we're going to do this. And if there's a UTI, we have an SMF. And I'm like,
what?
I don't know.
Head spinning with
right,
all
exactly.
these
I
letters.
don't know language.
I don't
Yeah.
know what this is. And I came home. I drove home from the Dallas area back to Austin and told Kim, I was so overwhelmed. I thought I was prepared, and I was so overwhelmed. I feel like most people are really overwhelmed. Maybe we should start a Facebook group or something to try to help people.
Yeah. And so how did all of that come to be? And tell me about the response to this group.
Well, it was at first when he first came home and had the idea, it was sort of a matter of, it was in the middle of COVID. We were actually really busy with our on-camera training business because everybody was on camera all of a sudden. So we were doing so many trainings.
Learning Zoom.
And frankly, I mean, and to be totally honest, when he first had the idea, I just thought, that doesn't sound like much fun stuff to talk about. Like that's hard stuff. And so partly because we were busy, and I think a little bit because it was sort of a matter of, is that what would we do? And fast forward a year, because it took about a year before they actually really moved his mom.
It took over a year. And not because of anything bad. The biggest thing with my dad, they've been married now 63 years. And at the time it was 61. Said, Dad, this will not work unless you're behind it 100%. Because if we move Mom and a week later or a month later or 6 months later, you go pick her up because you miss her so bad, it's going to be bad for both of you.
Right.
So he put it off, and we were going to move her in the fall, and then in February, and finally in March of 21, 2 years ago, we finally moved her. And that was the final stage, I guess you could say.
And I guess what really happened was the day they moved her, Mike posted something on social media about just, wow, what a really tough day this was. We moved my mom to memory care. Yeah. And what I noticed was, of course, there were so many people who were empathetic, but what got my attention were the numbers of people who said, I'm right there with you. I've done the same thing. I'm in the middle of it, or I see it in my near future. And not just necessarily Alzheimer's or that move, but just that caring for aging parents.
Yes.
And during that whole time period while we were sort of going through the process to move his mom, what I started really noticing and having my eyes open to was the fact that I had one friend whose mom had brain surgery, had another friend whose mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but I didn't know it because we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And that was what really got my attention, was the fact that, oh my gosh, all these people are going through this, and yet every single one of us feels like we have to recreate the wheel and that we have to figure out all of this on our own. And so I said, okay, you're right. We should do something. And I don't admit that very often normally. So.
That was a good sell on your part.
One of my few victories.
Yes, good.
So I just said, yes, we should do something. And we weren't really sure what that would look like. So we just said, well, let's just start with a free Facebook group and see what happens. And Mike also had the idea of, okay, how can we use what our natural skills are and from our careers so that we do interviews with experts? Because that was one of the things that we were needing selfishly for myself. I was like, let's talk to somebody about Medicare, and let's talk to somebody about this and estate sales and all of these things, because there were things that we needed to know about. And that's kind of where it started. And then as dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of people started joining the community, people that we didn't know, that's when we really realized, oh my gosh, so many people just feel so alone in this. That is really important. And again, I think what happens is that as the adult child, you find yourself in this situation and you don't even know what to Google.
No.
You don't even know what you're looking for. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because nobody really talks about it, and you don't think your friends know about it, even though they probably do.
Or have a different variation, or could at least point you somewhere. Right. But you're so right about a comfort in community and a sense of, first of all, I'm not the only one going through this. And secondly, here's a place where I may find information that could point me in the right direction. So kudos to you for creating this database, Parenting Aging Parents. It's a Facebook page that people can find and just follow and get that information. I'm assuming you've got all of the interviews and the things that you've done are uploaded to this Facebook page, right?
It's actually a private group. So it is a place where people can come and feel safe to be able to ask questions and share information, because that's so that you can find out what have other people tried. What are some things that, while it doesn't necessarily always work, because your family is different than my family, which is different than Mike's family, but at least it gives you some ideas, because I think the biggest thing is that you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So it really is, we decided to kind of build it out as a private community so that people could really be able to come and feel safe and share.
You've created also kind of guidebooks and resources. So, and I'm sure people are going to go to the Facebook page, but I really want this podcast to be about empowering people right now, right? At the end of this, I want them to feel like, okay, I've got a roadmap, I've got a plan, I know where I need to start and what I need to do. So let's say, I mean, and I was listening to your story, and it's interesting how everybody's story has a different aspect. So for instance, your parents are still together and still married. And for you, the issue was your dad having to let go of your mother, being in the home and be willing to acquiesce and put her where she needed to be. And I thought, wow, that's a whole dynamic that I've never thought about, never had to process, because my mother's alone. I'm alone. I don't have siblings. So I've just seen it as me and mom.
Right.
But this is interesting. So tell me, for somebody who is facing a parent who is starting to need attention, where you're seeing that the way things are operating aren't working anymore, where do you start?
For one, I think you just need to start talking with your siblings and other people in the family and figure out, what can we do? In other words, where do you live? Who can help? What can you afford? And there's a lot of things involved. And the hardest part is that because we're all different, there's not one answer for everyone. What's good for you is different than what's good for me, different than what's good for Kim. So you have to look at different things. But the biggest thing is being open to talking to people. Because so many people aren't. Because it is so depressing. You don't want to come into Dominique's room and say, hey, how you doing? My mom has Alzheimer's. Yeah, it's stage 6 and it's getting close to stage 7. It's just not good right now. It's like, oh,
right.
Wow, you've really brought the party down. Thanks a lot, Mike. You just don't want to be that person.
Right. And but there's a time and place for everything in those conversations.
There are, but so many people are so, whether you're embarrassed about it, you're shy about it, there's something holding you back, because I think it's completely different. It's similar, but completely different than having a kid. Because when Kim and I had our first back in 97, she knew how to change a diaper and she had to teach me. Otherwise, we didn't know very much about what are we going to do about raising this baby. Because we've never gone through teaching it how to roll over, how to crawl, how to walk, and that type of thing. But it's most of it's mainly good news. So there's good things coming. So when everyone that you know, friends, neighbors, coworkers, relatives, all come and have advice for you, they're happy to talk about it because good news is coming. But here, it's usually not good news. It's more of a case of, here's how to handle this. Here's how to keep from collapsing from all the weight you're putting yourself under right now.
It is. It's emotional trauma when you think about it. And it's a lot. And it's happening at a time in our lives when there's a lot going on. And the word overwhelmed is the word that I hear about often. So my feeling is talking about this, fleshing out ideas and direction can take some of that emotional trauma off. It doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It doesn't mean, you're not going to face decisions and challenges, but at least you're going to know where to go. So the first thing is be open. Be open. Talk. So you're saying family first. Talk to family and say, hey, I'm seeing this. I'm identifying this in mom or dad or both. What do you think we need to do? What is the second step at going to the parent? How do you handle what's next?
I think so much of that's going to depend on your relationship with your parent or parents, their personalities, your personalities. The challenge is that anything that was weird or awkward or difficult as a child as you're growing up, whether it's sibling rivalry, sibling, who's the birth order, whatever, any of those challenges that you maybe had with a parent when you were growing up just comes crashing back. It's so weird that, all the things that you thought were, okay, I thought we got past all of that stuff from after, we were all teenagers. Right. But some of that can come right back. And so I think some of it depends on the relationship that you have with your parent. But I think certainly in many cases, being open and having those conversations with your parent as well. And sometimes I think it's having those conversations before you really need them. If you've already had conversations about, do you have all of your legal documents in place? Have you thought about maybe what your future plans might be, where you'd be open to living, those kinds of things? Then when maybe there are signs that next steps need to be taken, it might be a little bit easier because they've shared some of what their desires might be at an earlier stage. So that it's not just all brand new that, hey, mom and dad, mom, you're showing signs of dementia. What are we going to do? And she doesn't remember a week later that you had that or a day later or 30 minutes later that you had that conversation about moving. And so the earlier you can have those conversations certainly will make it a little bit easier in the process.
So there you go. So for all of us in the communications business, communicating is key. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad to have you both. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but Kim and Mike Barnes are here. They've got a wonderful Facebook group called Parenting Aging Parents, and that's what we're talking about, how to care for our parents who are growing older and who need us, and we need to be ready for it and prepared. We'll be right back. You're watching Over 50 and Flourishing. Support for today's episode comes from Jenny Kane. Summer is here, and who doesn't want to have that easy breezy, minimalist wardrobe for the season? This refined California brand will have you looking elevated and feeling oh so comfortable. My favorites are the draping maxi dresses with so much flow and ease, like the drift dress. Also, check out the road dress. The classic lines are very Jackie O. And what's great is that these pieces will never go out of style. And they've got home essentials too. You can find your forever pieces at jennykane.com. Our listeners get 15% off your first order when you use code OVER50 at checkout. That's 15% off your first order. JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code OVER50. Again, head to jennykane.com to get 15% off your first order when you use code OVER50 at checkout. That's 15% off your first order. JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code OVER50. Let getting dressed be one less thing to worry about. We're back with Kim and Mike Barnes. They are helping us make smart decisions as we care for our parents who are getting older. It is an unknown space sometimes, uncharted territory. We don't know what to do. We feel confused, frustrated, stressed. Big decisions need to be made, and they are here to break it down, to not make it so complex and so overwhelming. And I'm a firm believer, you guys, that life done with a plan and preparation is a life done better. This is a big time in our lives. These are big decisions that need to be made. And unfortunately, we always see our parents. I mean, they raised us, right? They were the decision makers. And here we are now having to be parents and either assist in decision making or fully take over in decision making. And it's very hard for a lot of people to do. I love the first part of our discussion. It was all about communication. It's all about being open, sharing what you're going through. You learn by sharing from others, but you also stress the importance of dialogue within the family and talking to either mom or dad or mom and dad together if they're both still alive. So after that conversation that has been had, Kim, and you were talking about that, how do you get everybody on the same page and then pull the trigger on a decision that everybody agrees with?
That is the magic question.
Isn't it, though?
Yes. Yeah. And that would solve everything if we could figure that out. I think so much of it is, as we're trying to get on the same page, also know that it may not look the way you think it might. In our situation, I really wanted my mom to move to independent living. She was single. She wasn't driving anymore. She was in a house by herself. She probably wasn't eating that great because she was having to fix it for herself. She'd used Uber for a while, but after a while, that wasn't really an option anymore. And so I really felt like it was important for her to be in a community where there were people around and people to play bridge with and exercise classes and all of that. And when we had brought up the idea a couple of different times, and she was a little pushback about that.
Even it was after my mom and dad had moved, and my dad loved it. He's like, "Son, this is the best move we ever made."
Right.
So we would tell
tried to
Kim's
use
mom,
that.
"Mom, look, my dad loves it. You should look at it."
And she's like,
"Nope, I'm not going to."
Nope. And it was one of those conversations that you think, okay, this is going to be really interesting. When she just said, at Christmas time, "No, I'm not moving." Okay.
Was she in a house at that point?
She was in a house by herself.
On the west side of town here in Houston. Yeah.
And she was, there was a water leak and you have to deal with that. And I'm in Austin and my brother lived far enough away from her that it wasn't easy for him to get to, and he travels a lot. So, it was a challenge. And so I kept what I was trying to figure out is one of the big takeaways that I learned is you have to figure out what appeals to them in all situations, because what I can kind of work with my mom is different than what my work with Mike's dad. In this situation, what was really interesting is that my uncle came in town a month later and just kind of sort of not forced the issue, but kind of like, "Hey, let's go look at a couple of places." "Well, I don't really know. Let's just go look anyway. We'll just drive around." Okay. Well, within a couple of days, I'm out of town. I call her to let her know that I'm coming into Houston for a funeral. And she says, "Oh, perfect. I can show you where I'm moving." And I just said, Wait,
What?
Excuse me? Excuse me. Just a month ago you said, I'm dying in this house. Like,
Right.
you're going to have to drag me out of here. And she said, oh, yeah, I signed the lease today. And I said, oh. On the one hand, I'm like, oh, gosh, this is fantastic because this is her decision now.
Yes.
On the other hand, I'm a little panicked because she signed legally binding documents without.
And I have no idea where she's
Right.
going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
We haven't
where is
looked
this
at it.
place? I've never seen it before. So what I learned from that is that in many cases in that situation, it was her brother bringing up the conversation that made it a little bit easier for her, I think, than when either I brought it up or my brother brought it up. So some of it is figuring out
Who's the best conduit to make it happen.
and that kind of was an accident, really. That was not a planned strategy. But I think it's being aware of those kinds of things, that it doesn't necessarily always have to be the kid or the adult child. It might be
different
a
family
different family.
dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing to think about. Right. Who's going to have the best influence where it doesn't seem like it's got so much sting to it? Yes, because I think when it comes from the child, it probably makes the parent feel like the acknowledgement of, I'm aging, I'm losing control of my independence.
Yes.
And that's a tough one.
Yes, absolutely. Nobody wants to give up their independence.
Of course not. Yeah, your home, your vehicle. I mean, it's a lot. And we're talking from our perspective, but I always try to put myself in my mother's head. How must it feel? Right? And it's hard.
Yeah.
And we have to be sensitive to the feelings and emotions as well.
Yes. And sometimes I am not as sensitive as I should be. And I try to remember, I have to catch myself as I'm getting frustrated with her
Technology.
calling about technology or,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Yes.
I know, I'm not
Yes.
good either. I'm out
Yes.
of myself as well.
Yes,
I
I-
lose it. I'm like, we just talked about this yesterday.
Well,
but you can't say that because it's irrelevant. So
Yes,
yeah.
I joke sometimes that if we could just swap parents sometimes, I think I'd be much more patient with your mom.
Right. But that kind of goes back to your point. Sometimes somebody else is better at working certain things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've now gotten to the point where we acknowledge something needs to be done. A change needs to be made. Do you have a checklist of what then follows?
Basically so, but you've got to be flexible because, again, different personalities, different parents, different money obstacles, different financial stuff, different health stuff. There's so many different things that you have to worry about. But besides the fact that you have to go on their terms in so many ways. Like my dad talked to my sister and to me about mom moving to memory care, and y'all are in charge. It's like, okay, great. And we looked, and we finally found the place, and we started talking to him, and it took a year to move her, and it was because of him, which was fine. He had to be totally on board with it. But in the fall of, the fall of 20, we were ready to move her, and they were going to sell the house that they were living in that they still owned from out in the country, so to speak, east of Dallas. And he's like, let's hold off just a little bit because I want to get this sold. Mom was on the title, so she had to be there. But also, it's going to mean a lot for her for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Holidays mean so much to Mom. And part of me is like, Mom doesn't know it's the holidays, so we can tell her anytime's the holidays. But okay, it means a lot to you, so let's wait.
Sure.
So we're going to move her on February the 8th. It was all set, and on February the 6th, 2 days beforehand, he calls me and says, I'm making an executive decision. We're going to hold off. I said, Dad, everything's done.
Right.
Everything's signed,
ready.
sealed, delivered. I'm coming up Monday. We're moving her.
Yeah.
No, it's going to mean a lot to Mom. Her birthday's on the 22nd. Our anniversary's the 27th. It's going to mean a lot for her. It's really you, but okay.
Yeah.
So we waited. We didn't move until March the 8th. So we still got the move made. You just have to be a little bit flexible and realize that they have some things they may need to work through.
It's emotionality. It's connection.
In this case, it was letting go.
Yes.
Yeah. Because really for his parents, it was literally like a divorce that wasn't desired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's
Yeah.
an exact way to look at it.
Yes.
Right, because they're living separately.
Yeah.
He sees her
All the time.
very frequently, but
Yeah.
it's still just for
It's
a
still
visit.
so tough.
Yes.
It's not just.
I mean, I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
That's so difficult.
And I think that as far as that checklist goes, some of it is making sure, do we have things lined up? Have we taken care of all of the legal documents that we need?
Like?
Like powers of attorney. You need to have a durable, which is the financial power of attorney, which allows for an adult child to be able to step in and help, depending on how it's set up. But if you need to pay bills for them or sell a property or something like that. So that is so important. And frankly, be able to make decisions if they're not capable of making decisions. You have to have the medical power of attorney, which is going to be just for medical stuff. You have to have, they're different.
It's all separate.
All separate.
Yeah.
And the power of attorney is only valid while they're alive. So you still have to have a will or a trust if you decide that's important, but a will, so that helps manage all of that as well. And there's also medical directives,
the HIPAA release. Yeah. There's so many things that you don't realize you need them until it's too late.
Yeah.
And it's so hard then.
Yes. That's when it gets complicated.
Because again, when you need them, you feel like the world is on your shoulders and you can't, crisis level is at DEFCON 5.
Yes.
What do I do? And now you've got this, like, oh, I didn't know I needed that. And you can't get it.
Do you feel that it's wise to get an attorney? Do you need an attorney to do all of this? Can you do it on your own online? What's your suggestion? I mean, those are a lot of legal documents that you're talking about.
There are.
Yes.
You could do it probably yourself, but it's so much easier if you get an attorney involved.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has to be, you can make it as sort of
As
complicated
simple?
or as simple as you need to.
Sure.
Depending on, your situation. Is it a blended family? Are there different size kids involved? That kind of thing, where it might make it a little more complicated.
It's so much easier when you start early. Kim and I got married in '92. Didn't worry about a will or anything. We didn't really have anything. Poor TV people.
That's right. We had nothing.
Yeah. But we had our first child in '97. We thought, okay, we need to be good adults, good parents.
Sure.
So we put a will together.
Yeah. The floppy
old
disk
floppy
will.
disk style. Yeah, 2 pages.
Look at you two.
Yeah, took it to my dad's office and had it notarized and signed by witnesses.
done.
Like, we're in good shape.
Yeah.
Put it in the safe and didn't worry about it again until last year. Last year, we realized after we'd been doing interviews about wills with an attorney,
We thought,
hey,
We better revisit this.
we have another child.
we have another child. We have another child who wasn't in the will.
But see how life happens?
Yes.
I mean, honestly, there's so much going on that we manage that we forget about these things,
That's right.
let alone even do them floppy disk
That's
style.
right.
Right.
It's daunting. And I have to say, this is something I really, really want to address, because everything that you're talking about requires a plan. You're recommending an attorney because there is so much. And the first thing that I think about is there's so many people who financially are not set up for any of the things that you mentioned. They maybe can't afford these memory care facilities, assisted living. I mean, it's expensive. And it's not necessarily covered by insurance.
No.
And, there are a lot of people who have just taken in parents in their homes because there's no
they have to.
other option.
Yeah.
Right.
And even the ones who can't afford it, to be totally transparent about my dad, that he writes 2 rent checks a month, one for him and one for my mom. Yep. And those 2 combined are more than he made in a year back when he first started working in the 60s.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been a long time from now. But when you think about someone who's writing that check or those 2 checks, that's so overwhelming to him, even though he has the money now. But wow, I didn't make this much in a
whole
year
year.
back in the
Yeah.
60s. Wow,
Yes.
this is so hard to do. Oh, I can afford it. Okay, it's okay. But wow, it's such a mind frame to get into, and it's hard to cross over that hurdle.
Right.
Like, it's so hard for so many people.
Well, and that's why those conversations are so important too. Again, before you need them, do you have even an idea of what mom and dad have? Are they in debt? Do they have a pension? Do they have government benefits that they get, or were they a state employee, were they a teacher, those kinds of things? Do they have savings? Have they been trying to save for this? Did they have a financial challenge recently that they were actually in really good shape and made a poor investment, and now they are in bad shape? Because it's hard to be able to guide them or suggest things for them if you don't have at least a sense of that picture. And that can be really hard because some parents don't want to talk about it.
No.
Well,
And-
can you imagine going to your parent and saying, "I found a great independent living place for you. I think it's going to be great for you.
It's around the corner."
I'll feel
Yeah.
better about things. It's only $4,100 a month. I found it. It's not very expensive. This is going to be great." And they say,
I can't do
"I've
that.
only got $2,000 a month from Social
Security.
Security.
Correct.
I can't afford that."
Right.
And you're like, "Oh my gosh, start from scratch."
And then what? And
Yeah.
then what? What are the options? Because that's the majority of the story right
Yes.
there.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes, I mean, we hear stories all the time of people who will either have parents who are living with them because they don't have any other options, or they just they didn't save well, they didn't plan, they didn't expect to live this long, and they really hadn't planned ahead. And it is heartbreaking because there aren't a lot of options if you don't have that money set aside already.
Yeah. What does Medicare or Medicaid cover? I mean, I'm sure that's a conversation that's discussed in the Facebook group.
And they're different. And that's the hard part, because it's confusing. Until you need it, You
don't know.
Until we started,
Right.
we had no idea the difference between Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah, we did. We've done interviews just about what's the difference between
Sounds
Medicare
pretty
and
similar.
Medicaid.
I guess they're the same.
Yeah.
No, they're completely different.
Right, because Medicaid is really designed as a government assistance that is designed for people who are of less means. There are things like a Medicaid trust that you can potentially set up with the help of an attorney if you have especially two parents, and you have maybe one that really needs medical attention like nursing care, but you have the other parent who is actually fine and in good shape and at home, and you don't want to potentially have them spend all the money that they have together on mom's care, and dad is going to be left destitute.
Sure.
So there are mechanisms for that with Medicaid, but even Medicaid doesn't pay for an independent living.
No.
It doesn't pay for assisted living generally. It's going to be long-term care.
Yes.
Like a nursing home kind of situation. Medicare is medical insurance, really. So I guess that's the easiest way to think about it.
It does nothing.
So Medicare does nothing. So it's the Medicaid component that will offer some assistance, but like you said,
At a high level.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
and you have to qualify for it.
Right.
And you have to qualify. Does it cover at all anybody coming to the house? I mean, let's say somebody's independent, you know.
Only if a doctor prescribed it.
It gets
Yeah.
so
It gets
complicated.
really
And the thing that's
complicated.
really complicated is Medicaid is different in every state.
Yeah.
So the rules, right, you've got to figure it out where you are.
Yes.
Right.
Man, it's daunting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there are people who really specialize and know the ins and outs of Medicaid, for example, because
And
it is
Medicare.
and Medicare because it's so expensive. But I think the biggest way to think about it is that Medicare is medical insurance. So instead of the medical insurance that you have with a job, if
Sure.
you will,
You have Medicare.
You have Medicare,
Right.
And you usually have a supplement that goes with it to help cover the gaps. So that gets into it's a whole complicated
It's just
thing.
so
but yeah.
confusing because
Right. Again, that's your head starts spinning.
Absolutely. But do you recommend somebody contact somebody to understand what Medicaid in their state will offer them?
Yes.
Is there a number or a place to reach out to get that information?
you generally need to contact an attorney who's like a Medicaid attorney.
A Medicaid attorney.
Yes, I mean you could. I'm trying to think if you call Medicare.gov if that would lead to getting to the right person for your state. Area Agency on Aging is a government-funded program that is in cities all
over
across
the
the country.
Okay.
And it is a government-funded program, and they usually are a great resource to be able just to get to the right direction, to get pointed in the right direction. But it's called the Area Agency on Aging. Type it in and type in whatever city you live in, and most metropolitan cities, they'll have a location.
Okay.
So that's a great resource for just, again, they don't have all the answers, and they do provide some help and assistance as well sometimes. Differs by state and differs by community, but that's a great place to start.
Sure. It seems the biggest issue, and you've got a parent with dementia and Alzheimer's, right? That's a big thing that I hear about, and it's the decline and the emotionality of that, and the loss, and seeing the change in the parent, seeing the, it goes from forgetfulness to all of a sudden suspicion, agitation, real memory loss. How can you as a child handle that? Because here we're talking about all of the semantics, right? All of the things to get all the pieces in play, but we really need to talk about the emotional component of all of this too. It's big.
It's tough. It's not easy. I'll be very honest and tell you that it's not fun visiting my mom because she doesn't recognize me.
Yeah. I
have to introduce myself to her and, "Hi, Mom, it's me, Mike, your son." And even then, sometimes she says, "Are you my brother?" And it's not fun. We still have a good conversation. She doesn't remember anything about what we've done for the last 55 years.
Yeah.
But trying to talk to her and trying to bring up the old times is not something you can do. So you have to find other things to do. I'll talk about things. Every time I visit her for the last year, I've told her about her granddaughter moving to New York City, and she acts surprised and like, "Wow, really?" So, so
It's a new story,
I'm going
right.
through the same thing again.
Sure.
But something that I've learned, I kind of got some, I guess you could say, inspiration from her, because I was in a terrible car accident back in 1990 when I was 23. And at the time, I was basically in a coma for 5 days. And my mom and dad were told by doctors there's a good chance I'd be like that for the rest of my life. And if I got any better, I'd be like a child. And when I think about it, I had her write down her memories, since luckily I don't remember any of that. I had her write down her memories in a journal for me. And she wrote down about how when the doctor told her that, she said, "But what if, but what if, but what if," and over different questions. And he would cut her off and say, "No, it's not going to happen.
Don't get your hopes up."
Just accept that it's bad news." And despite that, she went home. They were staying at my apartment while I was in the hospital. My mom and dad went home, basically couldn't talk to each other because they were so numb. They fell asleep in bed, just hopeless because it was so sad. It was so terrible. Things were so hopeless. And my mom wrote that she got up the next morning, and she's from West Texas. She said, the old West Texas person in me got up and said, I'm not going to let Mike know that I'm upset or depressed or unhappy about all this. I'm going to be positive around him all I can. And that was the attitude she took. And so that's the attitude I take around her. And it's hard to do. It's a mind frame that you have to get into.
You bet.
But what I've learned is that you can't miss what's not there anymore. You have to love what's still there.
Oh, that's beautifully said.
And just if you grasp that for a second, it's so sad that she doesn't remember anything we've done when I was growing up. Vacations or family
special
outings
memories.
or anything.
Yeah.
But I just have to love the fact that you're still alive. You're my mom, and I love you.
Yeah.
And if you can look for some joy in that, it just helps in so many ways.
What a beautiful mindset. That is so very helpful.
But it's hard to do.
It is hard to do. I know.
I kind of compare it to, it's kind of funny, but I compare it to when we talk to people growing up about people who say, I want to be on TV. It's like, okay, well, and then they're like, hi, my name's Mike.
Not so easy, is it?
Yeah. And then suddenly, and you say, it's just mind over matter. You're just, you look at the camera and you just talk.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing here to where, okay, it sounds easy. It's really hard, but once you get over that hump and realize,
make it a pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a different conversation.
Right.
You can't have necessarily the same conversations that you've had in the past,
No.
which I think can be really hard.
You can't keep saying, remember we talked, right, you have to leave that word
it's so
out because
hard.
that's got to be
Yes.
so difficult.
It is so hard.
This conversation is so enlightening, and I love what you added about that, about just you emotionally preparing yourself for that time together, because it will completely change how you feel about that time together, because you're the one who's going to remember it.
Right.
The parent won't. Right. There's so much more to talk about. I'm so excited to have you both, Kim and Mike Barnes, Parenting Aging Parents. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back with Kim and Mike Barnes, Parenting Aging Parents. This podcast is about flourishing over 50. And so this is a very heavy subject, but the reason why we are talking about it is so that we, as the midlifers, the sandwich generation folks, we can flourish during this time. It's not easy making these big decisions for our parents, but it could be so much worse if we come from a place of, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what to expect. Yes. You guys are providing such insight, such wisdom and direction for people of our age to feel like, there may be things coming around the corner, but at least I've kind of got a grip on what I need to do, how I can plan, and how I can prepare. And so that makes us flourish. And I'm grateful for you and for this conversation and what you have set up and what you're doing, for all of us who are, nearing or entering this time. Yeah. As we were getting into the commercial break, you were talking about the emotionality of having to have a conversation with a parent who's really no longer aware of the relationship, of the past, of the history, and how you handle that and how you kind of get your frame of mind set to enter that space. Kim, you were talking about the grief that's involved because you are essentially losing somebody who's still alive. Yeah.
Yes. It's such a strange emotion, if you will. And it wasn't until we really learned and did an interview about what anticipatory grief was that I'd ever even heard the term.
Me either.
And as soon as I heard that, it made so much sense because, okay, so when I get frustrated with my mom about not remembering something or making a decision or getting scammed, oh my gosh, those kinds of things, as much as I want to, get really annoyed or frustrated, it also is sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Those aren't things that she would have done intentionally. Nobody wants to just accidentally give away a bunch of money because they got scammed. But I think it made me aware of, I'm probably have a little bit of grieving that I'm doing because she isn't able to do some of the things that she'd done in the past or wasn't able to make some of the decisions that she's made in the past. And so it's really being aware that that's what it is, one, and naming it that, and knowing that there's a grief component. And it is hard because your parent isn't the person they used to be.
Yes.
And especially if there's dementia or Alzheimer's involved, they really aren't the same person. And, whether it's a physical condition or dementia or whatever, they just aren't able to be the same person that they used to be. Yeah. It's really hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
And it's a strong emotion that we have to process, as I'm sure they are going through it too. In the beginning stages, that sort of self-awareness might still be there, that I can't do what I used to do, and I'm beginning to forget. And it's hard on everybody.
Yeah.
You guys have put together this incredible resource that I need my readers, my cheaters, because I can't read it without, because that does show I'm in midlife. I love this. So this is available on your website, parentingagingparents.com.
Yes.
And it's the Caregiver's Key. It's a guide for gathering essential information. So walk us through. I mean, I was glancing through this and I thought, wow, there is a lot of stuff that I never would have thought to collect information on.
Yeah.
So kind of tell everybody what's in here and what the process is.
It's a little bit of everything. All the stuff you need to know about your parents,
Right.
whether it's financial stuff, medical stuff about insurance, their passwords, to be able to get into their computer, to get into
And
their
how many
email.
times we've changed those?
Yes, get into their iPhone. But so many things. Just think about when that crisis hits, because the crisis will hit. It's going to hit every one of us. For some of us, already has.
Right.
But when that crisis, it goes up to the proverbial DEFCON 5. But if you're prepared with so many of these things, you can lower the crisis level, and it's a lot easier on you. And that's our goal, is that we want to make it as easy as possible. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be painless. There's still going to be a crisis, but try to lower the crisis level somehow. Because if you already know, well, here are the doctors I need to contact, or here are the medical people I need to contact, here's the insurance people I need to contact.
Here's mom's neighbor who cuts, or the kid who cuts her grass.
Who cuts the grass. Stuff like that.
You would never even think about.
It's all going to vary depending on, of course, where your parents are and what their living situation is.
Right.
But if you know already, okay, well, mom pays all of her bills online. Okay, she's in the hospital for a couple of weeks. Who's going to get into her email account to get those bills?
Yep.
And then who's going to be able to get into her bank account to pay those bills?
Unless it's set up on auto pay.
Right.
You don't know that until that conversation has been had.
Yes.
Right.
But there are so many things that can just make things easier, so you can concentrate on the crisis itself, and not this stuff that's on the outer periphery.
Yeah, it's a lot of minutia if you don't handle it. I'm just looking through here. You've got primary physician, cardiologist, dermatologist, rheumatologist, oncologist, ophthalmologist, everybody, dentist, other doctors or providers, blood type, smoker, non-smoker, organ donor, immunizations. Everything. It's incredible. And then here, income, trusts, online accounts, like you were saying, PayPal, bank account, passwords, all of that. Is this something that you and the parent fill out together? Do you sit down? How do you recommend going about this?
You can do it different ways.
Okay.
I know one person who shared with me that she used it as sort of a tool with her to sit down with her dad and do it together, and it made it just very matter of fact. It didn't seem so nosy.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I'm digging all into your business. You know?
I like that.
So that was something that they used. I've had other people who will say they'll give it to their parent and they'll fill it out for them. Me, I'm filling it out on behalf of my mom, because I've been gathering all of that information, and I'll get questions from the doctor who will say, has your mom had a shingle shot? And I say, Mom, have you had a shingle shot? And she said, probably. And I'm like, okay, that's not super helpful. But, so now I'm trying to, because my mom is single also, so I'm trying to keep track of a lot of that stuff. So that's what I use it for. So I think it can be just, again, knowing the personality of your parent and what would they rather sort of do it on their own and as a gift for them. And we've actually done some presentations for the older adults in the past, and they'll buy them sometimes and think, this is a gift I can give to my children. Right. And I think when you can come from that perspective, that this tool and or just the conversations we're having, I'm not trying to get all in your business, Mom.
Yeah.
I want to be as prepared as I can to be able to help you in the best way that I can.
Sure.
But so many times it helps just that we know things. My dad likes to tell the story about back when I was a teenager, back in the mid-'80s, my grandfather had a stroke. And because of that, he wound up going to the hospital, then into rehab, et cetera, et cetera. Well, during that process, my dad found out that because my grandfather barely had been in World War I in the Army, but because he'd barely been in, he was entitled to some VA benefits. My dad had no idea about that. My grandfather definitely didn't. So for years and years and years, he missed out on these benefits. So you couldn't get them back. But starting then, VA started to help pay for things for my grandfather to get the rehab that he needed after the stroke. And it's stuff like that to where if you had this to where I had no idea that dad or grandfather, whoever it is, they were in the military. They could have a benefit.
That's a call to make.
Or they have a pension. I had no idea that the job they had gave them a pension and they're not getting it right now. Or they had insurance and they're not getting it. Things like that, just so you have the knowledge that can help you, again, lower that crisis level.
Yeah. So you could use that as kind of a prompt, like to just sort of, hey, mom and dad, how do these apply? Do these apply to you? And that way you can get that information. And I do think, because I think our parents' age, they were very private. And they don't share in the same ways that maybe I think our generation hopefully will.
I think it's changed for
with
us.
Our kids.
Yes, I do.
And so they may not have shared some of that in the past.
Right.
If we don't know, we can't get the benefits. We can't advocate for them to be able to get some of the benefits that they might be entitled to.
And I think it also depends, too, on your parents' mental capacity, because you could hand a book like this over to them, but you don't know if it's being filled out correctly or if accounts are getting confused. So I think you've got to make that executive decision as well. Does this need to be something we do together? Or, can I trust that it's going to be filled out accurately, right?
Yeah. It could be a bonding experience.
Sure. I kind of use it as that. I mean, I'm like, hey, if I ask you this is something I never knew about you.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the person who shared with me, it was sort of just made it, we're just going down the list here, Dad. I'm not, these are just the things that they told me to ask, so I'm going to ask you. It just made it easier to be able to bring up some of the conversations so it didn't feel so much like I'm just being nosy.
Well, and you also have to realize that sometimes your parents can change. My dad was an accountant, CFO for a company for like 49 years. And he was very, 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 I cannot say the word very enough, very, very, very private about money. Growing up, I had no idea how much money he made. When I was in high school, I was there when he was buying a car, and we're in the room where the guy's saying, okay, Mr. Barnes, let me get your address, and I need to ask your salary. And my dad said, how much money do I need to make to buy this car?
Right.
The man gave him a number. My dad said, that's how much
what
I
make.
Write that down.
Write that down.
I'm all wide-eyed like, wow, okay. Well, now my dad, because he knows that my sister and I need the information, it's better that we have the information, he gives us statements showing what he has and how, just in case something happens to him, here's how we're going to pay for mom. So, again, people can change. So don't think, just because mom or dad was like this when I was a kid or a teenager, or even in college, things could be different now.
Correct. Do you guys discuss at all on your platform, I'm sure you do, end-of-life care? When you know that is imminent and there are big decisions to make there as well.
Yes.
That can really tear families apart because some may have an idea of how that's going to go. Others, I guess that's where it all needs to be spelled out in your legal documentation that you were talking about. But that's, it's overwhelming and cost again. I mean, there are so many things to figure out. How do you help people navigate that stage of this?
Again, having conversations
early
before
on.
you need to.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard, because so many of these conversations and some of the challenges that come from not having planned ahead, the answer is have done it sooner. But if you haven't, then that's a challenge. And I think it's just figuring out, knowing what are their desires, what would they want, and can we prepay for those, or what are our different options? And just so that way you just, and I know Mike has asked his dad some things recently about a service, because he just said, I don't want, when I'm grieving because something happens to you, I don't want to be having to try to figure this all out. It would be so helpful if you would just give me some ideas.
My mom and dad, before my mom's Alzheimer's started kicking in, they were very proactive and went and bought their coffins. They got the reservations, or whatever you want to call it, for a mausoleum, and they're in the same one that Mickey Mantle is in. And my dad likes to joke about Mickey's down on the first floor, I'm in the penthouse.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, laugh about that. So they're set for
They plan for that.
for burial, so to speak. But after we moved mom into memory care, I said, Dad, y'all are all set there, but did you and mom ever talk about what you would want at a
service?
At a funeral? And it's like, no, we never have. So I made a copy of that page on there where it says, what Bible verse or anything like that. And he's like, oh, okay. I said, Dad, I don't need it tomorrow.
Right.
Just think about it. But you need to think about it not only for you, but also for mom, since we can't really ask her now.
Yeah.
So Think about these things.
Those are tough conversations to have.
So there's a chapter in there that at the end, so it would just give you kind of the prompts of things to ask them
and
to help
I
start
guess
that conversation.
way to go about it, right? So it doesn't seem so intrusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to happen, but it's so.
I mean, think about if you're at a family outing, whether it's around the holidays or something else. You say, hey, "Mom, what's your favorite Bible verse? Mom, did you have any hymns that you really liked growing up?" Something like that to give you an idea,
right?
And then you write it down as opposed to, "Hey, Mom,
it doesn't have to be.
Mom, you're going to die someday.
Let's have the talk.
Right. That's good. But that's a great way. That's using some good psychology to get the information that you need.
But again, play to your parents' strengths. Or play away from their weaknesses and figure out what's best to get the information for you, but make it not as bad for them to go through it.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Any last comments, anything that you want to leave people with as they navigate this time in their lives?
There's just so much. I mean, I think, oftentimes my mom has been scammed multiple times. So that's a whole...
Can I ask how old your parents are?
Yes. Sure. My mom is 81.
Okay.
My dad is 85. My mom is 83.
Okay. So your mom's already faced numerous scams.
Yes, and has fallen victim to a few. So we've had to actually take made the decision to take the finances away, which was really tough. Really tough. She'd been very independent for a long time after my parents divorced, and even when she remarried and after her second husband passed away, she was always handled all of that herself. And so that was really hard, but we just had to kind of, again, appeal to, Mom, we don't want you to be taken advantage of.
Right.
And so that was, a hard lesson, but fortunately, it was not a devastating one. We've heard stories of, oh my gosh, hundreds of thousands of dollars being lost because of being scammed, which is just, oh gosh.
You can't even wrap your head around that.
Right. So I think I guess that's another example of just why it's so important to try to be involved and help them feel comfortable sharing it with you. I had to be really careful not to say, oh my gosh, Mom, how in the heck did you, really, what were you thinking?
Right.
Like you might say to a teenager. And I had to be really careful not to say that because I wanted her to feel comfortable enough to tell me.
Yes.
So that we could stop it. But I think that's another just example of the importance of having those conversations, trying to be open with your parents and helping them see that I'm just trying to make life easier for you. Which is really hard.
Yeah. And to me, it kind of goes back to the flexibility part because similar to when you have kids, whether they're small kids, middle kids, teenagers, even into college, you teach them things. You're trying to tell them, oh, make sure you do this. Don't make this mistake and do that. And that's what I've done for the longest time, especially with my dad, with technology, where I taught him spreadsheet stuff 40 years ago. He still knows the same 5 things to do with that spreadsheet.
That's good.
But I taught him a long time ago about if you get an email, don't click anything. Don't click anything.
Correct. Don't click a link.
And for years, he has forwarded me stuff where it says, hey, you're a PayPal account. Dad, you don't have a PayPal account.
Right. I've got my mom to do that. When
fine.
in doubt, just forward.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, for whatever reason, this was about a month ago, I get a phone call from him, and he sounds a little off kilter. He says, Dad, what's going on? He says, I was on the computer, and I just got this screen. It just said that my computer was messed up. I need to call this number. I said, did you click on something? I said, well, yeah, I clicked on something, but I called the number, and they said it was going to cost $147, so I hung up on them. Okay, Dad, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, the next morning, he calls me again, because he calls me all the time. He calls me the next morning. He says, I'm still a little rattled about yesterday. I said, well, you handled it okay. I know, but when I was talking to that guy, and he told me to hit those keys on the keyboard, I was like, whoa.
You
didn't tell me that part.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I clicked on something and that screen came up and I called the number and the guy on the phone said, well, if you hit these keys, I can see what's wrong with your computer, blah, 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 blah. I was like, Dad, unplug the computer. They have access to anything you have.
Yes.
And we spent the day, I was doing things, so I had to get my son involved, a family friend who's a computer genius involved, my sister involved, all to try to fix things because someone had gotten in and they'd put malware in there to try and take over the computer.
Correct.
And luckily, whatever malware program or whatever that my dad had on his computer kept it out. But still, it was this close to losing everything.
Yeah.
And this after I've told them.
Just from one link to click. I know.
But you've got to be flexible and realize that we all make mistakes.
Sure.
Even our parents who are in their 80s or 90s, we all make mistakes and realize, okay, just like our kids make mistakes, let's show some grace. It's going to be okay. We're going to take care of it. we'll move on.
Right. And I think just being aware that we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I think that if we do talk about it, then we can help each other.
Yes.
And there's no reason that we have to do all this alone.
No, everything is harder alone. Yeah. And the minute you open up and share, you feel an immediate sense of camaraderie, community, and almost relief.
Yes.
And I think, honestly, this podcast is providing that for so many people who are, where I am. And, luckily I'm blessed. My mom's doing great, but we have to think about and plan. And there are a lot of people who are already in situations and they feel like they are just underwater.
Yes,
absolutely.
So I'm grateful for you too and your passion project and what you've decided to do. So tell everybody where they can find you and what resources are available to them.
The website is parentingagingparents.com. That's the easiest place to go. There are dozens and dozens of interviews that we've done with different experts just to kind of help you know the things that you didn't even know that you might need to know about.
Right.
And then there's also a button that leads to the Facebook group if they choose to join. And we have some resources on our website as well just to help people know the kinds of services and providers that are out there that might be able to help them.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I'm grateful that we've helped so many and hopefully just opened people's eyes or maybe even given them just that exhale that they needed. Okay, I am not in this alone and now I know where I need to go.
That's exactly the attitude to take.
Grateful. So grateful for you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So great having both of them with us today. I know personally, I received so much information, so many things that I had not considered that I now need to think about and address with my mother, and I'm grateful for that. I hope that you are leaving this podcast feeling the same way, feeling while, yes, this is a difficult subject, we are now empowered to be able to take the steps and help make good decisions, not only for ourselves, but for our aging parents. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and share. It really helps this platform grow. I appreciate you being with me. It's so important that we flourish in this time of life, which is why it's called Over 50 and Flourishing. Thank you.